You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole for all things geeky outside of Star Trek. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And Christy Morris could not be with us this week, but I have brought in our pitch hitter, the one that, the one you want to hear. It's the one and only John Mills.
I think if they have the choice between me and Christy, that vote's going heavily toward Christy. So, but I appreciate the flattering words. Thank you. Always a pleasure to be here in the 602 Club.
Well, she's definitely the prettier of the two, that's for sure.
Okay, now see, let's not get out of control here. All right? It's a debate, but it's not settled.
Right. Well, I think for the listeners, it's settled. And you can also settle that for us over on social media. Find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. Follow us there. We're brand new to Twitter. And if you're listening to this show, please go over to Twitter, follow the 602 Club. Also, you can find us on Instagram as well now, and that's the 602 Club TFM. If you follow both of those places, you'll be entered to win $25 to Amazon. We're going to be doing the drawing there in September on the 21st, and you could be the winner to buy anything geeky that your heart would want. $25 or less. Or you can just have $25 off, that thing you've really been wanting, that's kind of expensive. So you can also find us, the entire network, on Twitter at TrekFM or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's a listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference on Facebook, where you can talk to all of the listeners around the world with what's going on here on the network. And, of course, Trek.fm. You can find us online, and you can go to the contact section, and you can choose the 602 Club, and you can send Christy and I an email. Also, quick shout-out to our associate producers, Ken Tripp at Davis Grayson, Ryan Millett, Daniel Noah. Thank you so much for supporting the show through Patreon. Patreon is the way that you can support our network here and make sure everything is coming to you each and every week. It is quite expensive to put this network on, and we definitely need your help. So go to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. There's some great contribution levels, but in the end, every little bit helps. Again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. Now, John, super exciting for both of us this week because we both went back to the theater.
True.
For the first time in quite a very long time. And, this will not matter in perpetuity. People will be able to skip this part because it won't be interesting other than a little time capsule. But I just wanted to talk a little bit, I think we have to, what it was like to be back in the theater after so long for both of us to see a new movie. And not only that, but to hit the ground, I think, with maybe the best movie I could go back to see, which is, Tenet.
I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about it because you know how I feel about movie theaters in general. From my perspective, where I am, they had the masks rule and, they don't hand out napkins and stuff like that. So, I got my bag of M&Ms and a soda and that's fine. Just in case anybody's wondering, peanut M&Ms are my go-to treat. If I go to a movie, that's what I'm getting. I'd say about 70% of the time. Red Vines or Twizzlers, depending on what's available the rest of the time. But from my perspective, it was nice because I knew that the crowd size was going to be limited. And as a result, I had less concern about people ruining my experience of going to the movie theater, if that makes any sense. So in a sense,
I totally understand.
In a sense, it was pretty great because I knew that I wasn't going to have to worry about, somebody being on their phone. I have, much like anybody else on the planet, I have a ton of stories about, just horror stories about the way people behaved in the movie theaters. But Matt, you go to the movies, the actual physical location, the movie theater, way more than I do. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it was pretty great. Now, where I'm living, we actually, the closest theater open to us was about an hour away. And so we had to drive quite a bit to get there, but it was definitely worth it. My wife found a great burger joint. We had an incredible gourmet burger before we went to the movies. We didn't get fries. We just had the burger so we could get some popcorn at the movie and really enjoy it. And we went with some friends, which was a lot of fun, to the movie theater. And I was really surprised because the theater was, I think, probably as packed as it could be with the restrictions that they have. Mm-hmm. So it kind of showed me that, and we got there, about 15 minutes early, even though we had our reserved seats. And they were cleaning the theater, and there were people all outside the theater waiting to get into the theater. I mean, it was a good amount of people, more than I thought would be there. And so, I mean, to me, it really showed that I think people want to go back to the movies. And not only that, but I went back the next day with a friend of mine because he didn't go with us. We went down again, and again, the theater was decently packed comparatively when you think of the restrictions we have now with to have so many seats between people and all that. So yeah, and I mean, honestly, it's just one of the best things that's happened in the last I would say 6 months is to be able to go back to the movie theater. It was so much fun to be able to sit down and enjoy a movie. I loved seeing all the trailers. Yes, I'm just like you. I will make fun of the fact that we saw a trailer for a trailer with Dune. But you know what? What I saw of Dune, I don't care because it looks amazing. So, in fact, it really, I mean, it's a minute, probably a minute 20 maybe of footage. So it felt like an actual teaser trailer, even though it's a teaser trailer for a trailer. So whatever, I didn't care because I was just getting to see, some of Dune, which... Wow, looks incredible.
I'll just interject and say that the funniest thing to me is when the final trailer is maybe about 20 more seconds of footage. That'll be the best part of it for me.
Yeah, exactly,
why didn't we just skip this part?
I don't get it. Didn't we already see this? To quote Tenet, now that part is a bit dramatic. So
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, it was great. And I mean, literally cannot think of a movie, maybe besides the new James Bond movie, that would have been big enough and cool enough to just have the experience to be back in the movie theater for,
right.
And I just wanted to have this conversation too, and I promise we'll get into the movie, but there are definitely movies that are made to be seen on the big screen, right? There are certain movies that you would be like, I could see that home. I mean, my friends and I got together last night. We watched Mulan together. We all chipped in some money, so it didn't really cost us very much to watch it. But we just wanted to see a new movie together, and I enjoyed it. But I mean, it was a movie where it would have been fun to see on the big screen, and I would have if it had come out in the theater. But I didn't come away from that thinking, oh man, that had to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Whereas Tenet is a movie, or Dune, or I saw the trailer for No Time to Die. It's those are all movies that you feel or even Wonder Woman 84, you're I want to see these on the biggest screen possible.
Well, I'd go over to another, action entry that I'm looking forward to, the next Mission Impossible movie.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I
know you F9. We'll both at this point be seeing that in the theater too.
Absolutely. Yes, I'll be seeing F9 in the movie theater. But just in terms of seeing the new Mission Impossible movies with what.
Yep.
I mean, I saw the photos of the stunt that Cruise did, with the motorcycle off the ramp and everything, and there's a sense, from my perspective, where it's it would almost be insulting to Tom Cruise for me not to see that on a big screen.
Yeah.
It's let's get there and, be safe and everything. But at the same time, that's a big monumental action sequence. That's a must see on a screen that just immerses you in it for sure.
Well, and I totally agree. I mean, I was just, before we were recording, I was rewatching Fallout at home. And, absolutely. I mean, so, yeah, I just think, there are movies that are meant to be seen on a big screen. That's what we, George Lucas always said that about Star Wars, right? He made it to be seen on a big screen. That was his thought process. And, you have these kind of directors like a Chris McQuarrie or, a Nolan, and they are working with the canvas they have purposely, and so, yeah, absolutely. So Tenet is a movie that you saw it before I did, and the only thing you would say that was that this movie was relentless. And
Yes.
I agree with you. This movie hits the ground running and it never stops. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that with you because I found it so fascinating that I remember before movie theaters closed, I saw the opening minutes of this film in front of another movie where they did the whole opera sequence, like they'll do that sometimes where they preview a movie by showing you, and they did that with Tenet. And so, but to realize that this was the opening of the film, like this scene, I mean, it just starts off with a bang and just like gets your heart pumping, and there's all these things happening and you're having trouble figuring out exactly what's going on and why. And it's like, Nolan just throws you in the deep end immediately, and then he makes you catch up the entire film. And I think this is one of the things that made this movie so great to come back to the theater for, because Nolan is just in a league of his own, I think, in many ways when it comes to the type of stories that he's telling on screen and what he's doing on that canvas.
I completely agree. This is the thing where I think I've tipped my hand. I think you have as well, which is fitting because with a movie that's structured like Tenet, we've tipped our hands already about, where we're going to head with our opinions here.
Right.
But in terms of the choreography of the opening sequence, what's thrilling about it is that Nolan has used these opening sequences almost like a calling card. The Joker, that opening in The Dark Knight, that was the first one. That was the punch you in the face. I remember I saw that early release in a real IMAX theater in a science center. And I remember when the screen came up and you had that shot going over the city and you heard the entire crowd gasp when it first came in. And that was the declaration. And then of course, Bane hijacking the plane and crashing it. But you look at all of these things that he's done, and he always just kicks the door in. And I think what's fascinating is the opera scene opening Tenet. You can sit down with just this scene and you can see every skill that Nolan has picked up along the way, from how he uses digital effects to how he uses camera placement to editing to music. It's amazing to watch his career because you see it all. Every time you move along, you see it coalesce. And this first scene is a benchmark that immediately comes at you and says, here's where I am now. We've built to this through my whole career, and this is what I can do now. And you look at it, and it was breathtaking. It was amazing to watch. I had not seen 1 second of the opera, and it blew my mind. And I was giggling in the theater because it was such a stunning opening sequence. And, we were just talking about Mission Impossible and F9. Those are, tremendous action franchises.
Yep.
But then I come in and I watch the opening of Tenet and I say, I struggle to think of somebody who does it better than Nolan does.
So you're saying nobody does it better?
Yes, and considering he's such a Bond fan as we are, it's completely fitting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is quite an apt comparison, like with the idea of Bond, right? And the type of action, and I think, you kind of walking through the Nolan history is so key, because we can see that he really does like to open his movies like this. As I rewatched Interstellar before I went and saw this, and that movie also starts like that too, because it's the dream sequence of his, the crash, and it just really kind of throws you in to everything. And so, he really does like to do that, to grab your attention and not let you go. And this is a movie legitimately where it almost never lets up. There are a few moments where you can kind of breathe, but it is heart-pounding, intense action and just story and everything coming at you every second. You know, this is a movie where you cannot not be paying attention. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's classic Christopher Nolan. I mean, you think of, Inception was very much like that too, you know, where everything about that movie is building so that you need every piece of information he's throwing at you in every frame to put everything together. And this is very much like that, especially with the high concept that he's working with, again, Nolan's playing with time.
Well, and what's also, we're sitting here talking about the trajectory of his career and everything like that. What's also at play here is in terms of the way that he's throwing the information at you. Like you said, he throws you in the deep end, and you compare, for instance, to Interstellar or something like that. There is an intense mastery of style that is somewhat unlike other directors that I've seen. There are a couple others where I could pull them out. Hitchcock would be a name that would come to me. Scorsese would be another, where it doesn't matter who's doing the photography. It doesn't matter who's doing the score. It doesn't matter who's doing it matters who's doing the editing. And I'm not saying that to say that these people don't matter. I'm saying that Nolan worked with Wally Pfister for a huge chunk of his career, and now, you know, Wally Pfister and he are going off on different trajectories. Hans Zimmer usually does his score. Ludwig Göransson comes in on this one, but it still looks, it still moves, and it still sounds like a Nolan movie. Even though the specific people have changed, he is apparently the type of director who's so good at communicating exactly what he wants that he always gets what he wants out of it. And that's, I think, the mark of a truly gifted director is that he can select who's going to give it to him, and he can communicate to them very clearly what I want, and they can bring it to him, and that's how everything comes together.
Yeah, and I mean, what's fascinating to me was learning that this is something that he's been working on idea-wise for about 20 years, this movie. Mm-hmm. And that this iteration of his script has been about 6 or 7 years. And so he has been playing with these ideas over and over in his mind. And I think in many ways, as you were, I think this is where it was so great that you started kind of with his trajectory of filmmaking and where we kind of really saw some of these things start to come into play big time with The Dark Knight, and then The Dark Knight Rises, and then continuing on. You can tell how this movie specifically is almost like the culmination of everything that he's been doing over, the last 10 years. And, he's put everything that he's learned about and been doing in filmmaking into this movie, and then kind of one-upping himself on top of that, which I think is something that was really interesting in watching this. And then just to know, like, the secrecy of this movie, like, your three main actors of Washington, Pattinson, and Debicki, not allowed to read the script outside a locked room. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how much this movie was kind of tried to, keep it under wraps, because this is truly a movie that you don't want to have ruined for you. You don't want somebody to kind of let you know how it all works. And I think that was one of the masterful things that, the trailers were able to do. Is we started off talking about trailers for other movies and stuff being back in the theater, but we got an idea of what this movie was about, but nothing ruined all of the surprises that came along the way. Everything catches you off guard, and part of that, I think, is his master filmmaking. Again, he's hit the ground running, and he has you focus in all these different directions, and like, it's hard to piece everything together until he really wants you to, which I think is really smart as well in his filmmaking and the way that he's directed this movie.
Well, and I think there's an argument that can be made where if a movie is truly great, spoilers shouldn't matter because if it's truly great, you're going to see it more than once and you're going to know those tricks, right? But I would say that the reason keeping it spoiler free matters, especially with a film like this, is yes, I'll come back. I'm going to see Tenet again in my life. I know that. Right. I also know that the first time I see a magician trick, I'm delighted by it. That's where the emotional bond is made. And the first time I see a film like this, the emotional bond, the memory, the feeling behind it is what gets established. I can come back to it and try to figure out how the magician did the trick, or I may even know how the magician did the trick. But it's no reason to rob me of the delight of seeing the trick performed for the first time.
Right. And I'll say that too, just kind of even thinking about the movie, and as we're talking about Nolan, like this is a movie to which you want to see again because there's so much to break apart with it and piece together that you long for more viewings. I compare it to I was talking to my friend after we saw it the second time. I saw it the second time and his first time, but I was like, this movie just reminds me of when you saw The Sixth Sense. Once you saw The Secret, I never cared about going back to the movie again. The trick was over for me at that point. But this movie, there's so much going on with all the different nuances and all the different ways that he's playing with things and all the different ways that even seeing it the second time, I started to pick up on all the little things, but I knew there's so many more. And to me, that's what makes it exciting is you continue to be able to pull it apart. And not every movie does that well enough that you care to pull it apart repeatedly.
Well, and there's also the fact that when it's put together so well, I'll actually hearken back to one of my favorite David Fincher movies, and one that I think probably emotionally I have a much stronger bond with than a lot of his other work is The Game, starring Michael Douglas from the 1990s. And once you know the trick with that one, you could argue, oh, well, I don't need to see that movie anymore. But you do go back because Fincher puts it together in a certain way that when you do go back, you do get that delightful experience of figuring out how many things he put in front of you that you weren't paying attention to. And then when you do pay attention to them, you say, oh, how did I miss that? And so that's where Nolan is with this. But the thing is, Nolan's always worked in that space. This really is, in a large sense, because when I was thinking about this the days after I saw it, I was looking for that way to describe it. And I would say that Tenet is as if Memento and Inception got together and had a kid. And it's like, if I had to pick only two Nolan movies for somebody to see before seeing this, it would be Memento and Inception. And I would say those are going to be, he's going to give you his ground rules. And that's, of course, amazing because Memento is the one that busted in and immediately established him as somebody that was going to play with montage and time in a very specific way and challenge the audience to keep up and pay attention with everything.
Sure.
And that's the thing. I know I'm rambling a little bit. I'm obviously a Nolan fanboy, but I love the fact that Nolan treats his audience with the respect of believing that they're intelligent. There's nothing dumbed down or slowed down in this. It's just given to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, it's interesting because I feel like this movie, I would also say this movie has a lot to do with not just the two that you mentioned, but I saw a ton of Inception, not just Inception, but Interstellar ideas in here too, when it came to the way that he was playing with time. And partially that was the way in which the future was impacting the past of time. Mm-hmm. I think that's the thing we were kind of talking about earlier is how much of, Nolan's been really working with this iteration of the script for 6 or 7 years, and you can tell that this is that culmination, right? Of all of these things. And so one of the big parts of this movie, John, obviously is the mechanics of time. And in many ways, our protagonist, played by John David Washington, who is phenomenal, is basically like a temporal James Bond, and who's working to prevent people from the future from harming the past. And I just have to say, like, Nolan takes all of the ideas of time travel and pays homage to them, from classic Star Trek to like parallel worlds type of Star Trek to like, I mean, he uses all of our classic tropes of time travel, but then he does it in the Nolan way, I feel like. And I was really caught off guard by how well it works, and I shouldn't be surprised. But part of that is, I mean, you know, they had the theoretical physicist Kip Thorne, who worked on Interstellar, work again with Nolan on the idea of time and quantum physics to make this seem as legitimate as possible. And I really loved where they kind of come down to in the idea of time travel in this. I thought it worked really well.
Well, I think the way they also, you know, approach the whole idea of, you know, well, what does this mean for free will? And they say at one point, intent. That's what creates the thing that echoes and goes back. And it's one of those things where when you and I, when we're here and we start describing, you know, the mechanics that they go into, what I've found in the aftermath of seeing the film is that, like all truly great sort of theoretical, you know, physics sort of things, it's one thing to comprehend what they're throwing at you. It's another thing to try to parrot it back. And so it's as much fun to figure out how would I put this as clearly as the movie did when I don't have to try to explain it to somebody. I would want to sit them down in that one explainer scene to say, okay, that they're going to run through everything for you. I got what they were talking about, but I'm not sure I can convey it as clearly. But
right.
What I loved about the fact that what you mentioned was the fact that he is a James Bond, again, getting back to the Bond influences, who is involved in to borrow a term from Star Trek Enterprise, a temporal Cold War.
Which they do in the movie.
Right.
Yeah.
And
somebody was watching Star Trek Enterprise.
That's right. That's right. Somebody was. But this idea that the nihilism that infects the future that's trying to take its revenge on the past is so philosophically interesting and complex, because it gets back to this idea that he explored in Interstellar, where everybody had given up, but it's Matthew McConaughey's character that refuses to and is willing to go on the journey. Whereas with this is, you know, Washington's in the role of the guy who's trying to defeat the defeatists, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what made this work for me, and I was telling a friend after we saw the movie the first time, I was like, all of that Star Trek really paid off for the temporal mechanics, you know,
right.
to understand what they're talking about, because, you know, Star Trek has been doing this since the beginning when it was doing time travel, and since Nolan is using all the different ideas of time travel, you know, classic time travel that you can change the events of the past to change the future, the idea of parallel universes, the idea of the grandfather paradox, you know, all of those type of things. You know, I've heard all of those, and they make all complete sense to me. But what I loved about this movie is the way that Neil describes it, Pattinson's character, which is what's happened has happened, but that doesn't mean you can't influence what's happened.
Right.
And that's where the whole idea of, like, going back, you can alter or change things in a way, and basically influence the past. Because once something's happened, it's happened, but that doesn't mean we can't gerrymander it a little bit, you know? And
right.
I thought that was really fascinating, because it makes complete sense to me that you would, you know, be able to do that if time was this type of commodity that you could use, you know? And in many ways, that's where, specifically with Interstellar, where you have these future beings, whether they're human or not, like, McConaughey's character believes is to be debated, but that these 5-dimensional beings that can, transcend the time and move through time just as if it was just another commodity to them. Here it's kind of that same way, but the rules that they come up with going back in time and like being inverted or reverted, all that stuff just really works really well, but it's also visually stunning too. And I think that's the thing, that everything that he's doing with the mechanics of time also create a really interesting visual stimulus as well as a mental stimulus. So like he's found the best of both worlds to really bring this to the screen, because instead of like classic time travel where you just go back and you're just in one spot, right. The hack to actually travel back, through reversion and everything is phenomenally interesting.
Well, it puts a necessary limitation on the characters, because a lot of the problems that happen with, let's go to the Back to the Future movies, as much as I love them, right? As much as they're a formative part of my past, everybody who grew up with those movies, they mean something to you because they're terribly entertaining. But that's very much, time travel as a plot device sort of thing. Where Tenet excels is it seems to treats time travel as if it's a real thing, and this is how it would work in order to happen. And it has enough of a conviction of its idea to make it so that you accept it. I spent no time trying to critique or break down the time travel in it, because the way it was explained made sense. And so I said, okay, I'll go. Like, I forget who said it, but somebody said you can only ask for one huge suspension of disbelief with movies, and that would be the huge suspension of disbelief. There are other little ones that go along the way and stuff like that, but you can't ask too much of me to buy in to what's happening.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And that's where this really succeeds, is it's really complicated and it's really, in depth, but it's never at any point something where I take myself out of it and say, okay, that's just a bridge too far. You just ask too much of me. Like he always asks just enough in the moment for you to go along with it.
How did you feel, and did you figure out the trick? Did you figure out the prestige?
Yeah, this is the thing, is we've been pretty loosey-goosey with it, but it's one of those things where it's like, how much detail do I want to go into? Because this is a movie where I want people to go see it, sort of thing. So it becomes one of those things where, I'll just answer yes, but at the same time, that's all I want to, that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit further and say that I think intuitively my brain knew that that's what was going to happen, but it was such a joy when it finally happens. When you realize that you're basically going to go back through the movie backwards.
Right.
To a point before you even started, is just phenomenal. And that these characters have been interacting with themselves and they didn't realize it until that point. Right. It's so smart. And like, this is the thing I loved about seeing it again, was that all the mechanics of time really made more sense, but also I was able to pick up on all of these different things, with like specifically like the Neil character and where he comes in and how he's influencing everything. But then picking up on the little parts of dialogue specifically that also play into the end of the movie and why we go to this specific place. And like all of these things just work so phenomenally well. that it really is like this elaborate puzzle, but it's like a 5-dimensional puzzle, where you're really, everything is working together just perfectly, and and once you get to the end, you're like, wow.
But what I really enjoy, and again, I'm still going to stay sort of careful with it, is that the big action sequence that we're all going to treat as the climax is not the thing upon which the future hinges. It's a throwaway moment that you don't think about until it plays out
right
at the end. And when you catch that part of it, that for me was the joyous moment, because I think it really supported the idea that we go through this whole movie where everything we're conditioned to say, okay, this is a big action sequence. This is what we're going through. The big action sequences are determining the flow of X, Y, and Z with the characters. And then the way that he resolves it is, no, it was actually a small moment that decided the fate of the world. Something you wouldn't have even thought of. So something that you would have just said, oh yeah, okay. And then you find out, and that is, I think, again, gets to Nolan's philosophies that he constantly returns to, is that it's the small things that matter. I'll take it out of this context. I'll go back to Interstellar, where, and this is, I guess, a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen Interstellar. So fast forward over the next couple of minutes, if you haven't seen Interstellar, but the watch,
right?
You don't think anything of it. It's simply a thing. And then it gets to the end and you go, oh, wow, everything hinged on that. And so that's what that small moment, it really is, in a sense. You know what it reminds me of? And I know I've been rambling, I'm sorry, is 12 Monkeys. Where, have you seen 12 Monkeys?
I have not.
I'm not going to spoil it then. But I would urge you and anybody who hasn't seen 12 Monkeys to watch 12 Monkeys and Tenet and see how the endings are very structured the same sort of, actually, wow. I think a tip of the hat to Mike Schindler, who started my obsession with double features. That would be an interesting one. 12 Monkeys and Tenet together as a double feature would be really interesting. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I totally understand. Because I feel like, in many ways, Nolan is a filmmaker that reminds me of George Lucas in many ways, because they both are so they're so wrapped up in filmology and film and the stories that influence them, and those kind of pour out into the movies that they make. Mm-hmm. Nolan is very much the same way. He's a film guy. He loves film. He loves stories. And what he does then with his stuff is to pour all those things that he loves into his movies. And I think, it's clear that he is a filmmaker through and through who actually loves film. Like, he is a student of it as much as he is a creator of it.
Yep.
And I think that's what makes his film so special for so many people. So, and I think, to me, I loved, I have not seen BlacKkKlansman, so I haven't seen John David Washington in anything, but him playing with the protagonist, the guy we don't even know his name except the protagonist, as this agent for Tenet this whole time. I mean, he was phenomenal. Part of it, his portrayal was, and I realized this, in the scene where they're kind of changing up the plan a little bit, one of the guys says to him, "This is Cowboy S."
Yeah.
And he's the cowboy in the movie the whole time. Like, yep. He's doing things by the seat of his pants the entire time, and he even has the cowboy swagger to go with it. He has the cowboy attitude. The whole conversation he has with Michael Caine, where he's like, British people don't have a monopoly on snobbery, yep. just the way he says his lines, the way he interacts with all these people who could kill him at any moment, but so cavalierly. He's just, again, he's basically an American James Bond. I mean, that's who he is. And he plays it so well. He's so likable on screen. And, for all those people who, get uppity with Nolan about, they feel like his characters, are so one note or whatever, everything's kind of blah. Like, everything about John David Washington carries this film in a perfect way. Like, every time he's on screen, he's magnetic, and I'm loving what he's doing. I
agree. In a just world, he becomes a huge marquee star after this, like big time. I want to see him in a lot of stuff. If he wasn't American, I'd love to see him as Bond. If he heck, make him a Green Lantern, make him Jon Stewart. On board.
I mean, basically, if he's in something, depending on what the movie is, obviously, because the subject wise, but I'm going to be more inclined to see it because I really liked him. But I also want to specifically address that criticism that you bring up of Nolan, that his characters are too locked down or whatever. It's refreshing to me to be in a film where everybody has a better control over their emotions than the typical method acting, intensity that people tend to bring to these sorts of features, because a lot of times in action movies, it's almost as if the actors show up and get a direction from the director. I mean, who else? That tells them to take it up to 10. This is a high energy, high action piece, and bring your emotions up sort of thing. Whereas the protagonist is in situations where if he lets his emotions get the better of him, everything's going to go south. So I don't want to see him have a big emotional break or a big over the top sort of thing. And the same thing is true of Cobb in Inception, and the same thing. But what's crazy is that people would make that after Interstellar, where McConaughey's performance is so incredibly powerful. Yep. And Christian Bale's performance as Bruce Wayne in Batman is so emotive. And so I don't understand the criticism of it. And it's almost as if it's like it gets back to that thing that I almost always bring up about Christopher Lee working on episode 2, where this quote has really stuck with me, where he says, method acting is a method. It's not the method. There are situations where you don't need to do, the way Robert De Niro approaches Cape Fear or something like that. And it's still a believable character, it's okay not to have over the top emotion, right? In a piece like this, it's okay. You can do it. Well, yeah, and I mean, we'll talk about it in a minute. I think you get those characters can have that. But one character and person that really stood out to me, obviously, because we're about to see him next year as Batman. Robert Pattinson, is very famous, obviously, for being in the Twilight films, but his role beyond that and his life beyond that as an actor has been anything but those type of things. He's been phenomenal. I did not like The Lighthouse, but he was great in it. He was great. Movie was okay. It was okay. Yeah. But he's phenomenal here in this movie. And what was one of the things that did you feel this at all? But I felt like he kind of dresses like Christopher Nolan in the movie. Oh, Nolan always has a him character somewhere in the mix. And yes, I completely agree with you that he was channeling Nolan big time. Absolutely. And he is, what was interesting is that you have the cowboy in John David Washington, but Pattinson is basically playing Bond. In a lot of ways. Like he's cavalier, he's funny, but he absolutely knows what he's doing in every single moment, and he's always in control. And I was like, wow, again, there's all these different types of Bond characters in this movie, but Pattinson was also, his Neil felt like a Bond type to me as well, so.
And I completely agree with you. I think that Neil does feel very Bond-like, and I think that very much ties into Kenneth Branagh's performance. He's basically a Bond villain.
Yep.
In this film, like it just right down to his plan and his outlook on life and everything like that. It's like it is seriously like you took Blofeld and the Man with the Golden Gun and whoever was
Drax
the bad guy
from Moonraker.
Yes, yeah. Drax, and you just put him in a blender and you said, "There's your villain." It's like, oh, okay, like yeah, I see it, and the thing is, it works so freaking well. And what I love is, again, getting back to that whole performance thing. Branagh works with him in Dunkirk, which similar, it plays with time and moments and stuff like that, and it's, to borrow a line, it's it was apparently the beginning of a beautiful friendship, because this is one of the best performances I've ever seen a director get out of Branagh. It is.
Yeah, other than his own Hamlet, which is phenomenal.
Oh, his Hamlet. That's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
We should cover that sometime. But like, it is, man, I will go to bat for that version. So,
oh, me too.
Oh my goodness.
Me too.
Oh,
phenomenal.
I got to see that in the movie theater. Oh my goodness. It's one of my favorite movie experiences. Anyway, Branagh gives such a, we've used this word a lot, just talking about Nolan. He gives a masterful performance here. Mm-hmm. He is legitimately terrifying when he needs to be. He's legitimately charming when he needs to be. And he's 100% believable the entire time. Like,
right.
it really is just such a fantastic, expression, a reminder, if you will, of what a tremendous talent Branagh is and what he brings to a film. It's just magnificent.
Well, and I think, Branagh and Pattinson are both in that camp where it's like, you've seen them in things where you're like, but then you get a director that just truly brings them to life. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, I agree with you. Both of them, I think, are just phenomenal in this movie in different ways. And I think that's the range that he's getting from his actors in the movie is fantastic. I actually really loved, and you, John, I don't think you know Doctor Who very well, but basically, the protagonist's relationship with Neil is very much the relationship between River Song and the Doctor, where they're passing different ways in time, and that's what I thought was really fun. Again, you can tell that Nolan's playing with a lot of different things that have been in pop culture and time travel for a long time, and he's using them all to his complete advantage, and so that was really fun. That is, Pattinson's character is basically moving backwards, and the protagonist is moving quote unquote forwards in time. They cross paths, and like, for the protagonist, he has much more time with Neil coming than Neil has with him as he moves back. Like, it's so fun. It's like, it's just so much fun. And it makes me want to see that movie, even though it wouldn't really matter because everything comes down to this part of their relationship. So,
yep.
Love Elizabeth Debicki. She was in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was phenomenal. Such a great film. We talked about it here in the 602 Club. Totally worth going back to. She's also in another movie, or not movie, but there's a mini-series called The Night Manager with Tom Hiddleston. And then the bad guy there is, he played House. Who I'm talking about?
Yeah, as soon as you said it, Hugh Laurie.
Thank you. Yes. So she's phenomenal. She's so good, and her performance in this movie is one of the best in the film. And part of that is I really love her storyline as Kat. The fact that at the beginning of the movie, she's talking to the protagonist, and she says that she wishes she was one of those women who could just dive away from her husband. and that in the end, she creates her own freedom by being the woman who is diving away. She doesn't know it, though. And I really loved, I thought it was such a great storyline.
Yeah, I agree, wholeheartedly, obviously. I think that if anything, as we're sitting here talking about it, what's really, really interesting is the emotional level on which all of these actors play are all aspects, they're facets. And she is, I don't know exactly how to put it, it's one of those things where I'm not exactly sure how to put it, but it's one of those things where she brings a certain emotional level and Pattinson brings another and Washington brings another and Branagh brings another. And it's all a facet of one emotional state, if that makes any sense, where it all plugs into one emotional state, which is another thing also that I make constant reference back to Inception, but it's like Inception, where you have, the architect and the lead and the planner and all of these people working together, and they all operate on these different planes. But then when you put them together, it's like a Jenga puzzle where everything comes together and it's one solid form.
No, I mean, that's a great way of putting it. And I think it kind of relates to something I was saying earlier about, that this is kind of like a 5-dimensional puzzle. Mm-hmm. All of these dimensions are working together, whether it's the mechanics of the time travel or the characterization of the characters and the emotions that they're feeling, and you put all of them together, and it's just really, really beautiful. And I loved, too, that you get to have kind of a more fascinating type of connection between a male and a female character, where John David Washington's protagonist has this protectionist nature towards Elizabeth Debicki's cat and her son, and they have a very strong connection. And it could, if they weren't in the line of work that they are, with the protagonist, there could be a love story there. But it's a better love story because it's about true care for a person in need, and not just about romantic feelings. And I really appreciated that, and I thought it was such a strong part of the storyline, that you could see, obviously, if this was a different type of movie, it could go somewhere, but it's never going to be able to go anywhere like that. And I just really appreciated this whole idea of wanting to take care of somebody and get them out of and help rescue them from a really abusive situation and give them true freedom. And they both get to work towards that. And then, and then part of it is, she really gets to be the, help be the architect of her own freedom as well. Which I thought was a strong storyline for her, altogether.
And one thing that's interesting for me, and I know that this is going to seem like such a superficial, silly thing to even say, but it is something that is very much rooted in knowing how movies are made, knowing how movies are shot, as we all do. I don't possess any special knowledge. People know how things are put. People know how stars feel certain ways about how they appear on screen in relation to their co-stars. And it, for some reason, meant a great deal to me that they never cheated the camera in certain scenes so that John David Washington looked like the same height or taller than she was. They acknowledged the natural height difference between the two of them and never made it an issue and never cheated the perspective. Now, in The Dark Knight Rises, Tom Hardy wasn't as tall as Christian Bale, so they cheated it certain ways. And they used sound effects to their advantage and those sorts of things. But with this, it's so oddly refreshing to see a movie, and I know that this is going to seem weird to some people, but it's oddly refreshing to see a movie where the general attitude is she's taller than he is, so what? like it for some reason it just stood out to me as weirdly significant.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because one of the things that I was thinking of the entire film is how she's taller than everyone.
Yeah.
And not only that, but, just about everybody in the movie is taller than our main protagonist.
Right.
Which I think is really fascinating. And but it also, by not feeling like we have to do anything about it. He gets to just be the height that he is. Like, I mean, look, I'm 5'9", not that tall. So it's not, I appreciate when we allow men to be the height that they are, and we don't have to portray every hero as being the same,
right.
And so, I think that that's really cool that we get to celebrate, Debicki being who she is, and so she's a taller woman. Who cares? Like, let that be seen on screen for all the beauty that she has, the same way all the beauty that John David Washington brings to the screen with his race, his height. Like, why people should just be who they are on screen, and like we should celebrate that. And I think you're absolutely right. I don't think it's a small thing that we kind of in this movie just celebrate the characters for who they are and don't try to make them look different or better than what they are. They always just are who they are, which is pretty awesome, So
agree. Absolutely agree.
No, that's a great point. I like that you brought that up, John, because it was something I was thinking about. I was like, it was so fascinating, especially that scene where she's walking in the kitchen and she's in heels, and she's way taller than everyone, even the big bruisers who come in to beat up, the protagonist. So yeah, it's such a striking scene, and it works so well. Just to embrace who these people are as just actual people, the actors themselves, is really cool.
But it's also a sign that Nolan cast people based on their ability.
Yep.
As opposed to saying, no, I need somebody shorter. He said, no, she's the right actress. Or he's the right actor. There was no sort of, because there's, obviously throughout the history of film, there's a bias toward, no, my actors need to be the same height because I got to shoot it a certain way. I got to take and so, yeah, it's really interesting because Nolan, who's so known for his artifice, allows that amount of reality to come in without making it a point. He's willing to let that just be what it is.
No, I love it. And I'm just glad that you brought that up. So I do have a question for you, something that I was thinking of, that I thought was fascinating to me, especially just, before seeing this movie, having just seen Interstellar. And I wanted to see if it's something you agree with it. And I kind of thought of this as the idea of it's Nolan's new cynicism. Because in Interstellar, when you see that movie, the five-dimensional beings in the future, whether they're humanity or some other type of beings, they're helping save humanity. But here we see, and so for the argument, we'll just go with what McConaughey's character, he believes they're humanity in the future, so we'll go with that as well. In Tenet, the future part of humanity wants to exterminate the past because of what we've done to ourselves through our selfishness, and then you have another section of humanity, which is Tenet, who wants to try and preserve the past, and so it was fascinating to me to see this dichotomy between humanity, whereas in the future, in Interstellar, humanity has become these incredible beings, and they're apparently very united with their goal of saving past humanity, which, the mechanics of that, time travel-wise. So here, though, there's a portion of humanity that wants to wipe out all of humanity, even if it means the end of reality.
Yeah.
Like absolute nihilism.
Yeah, but I don't think that's Nolan's perspective. I think that
No. I'm not saying it's necessarily Nolan's perspective, but I'm just saying that it seems as though there's crept in, and I don't know if it's just because of the last, maybe 5 or 6 years, but there just seems to be a new cynicism about the way the future will view who we are now. Are we worth saving or not?
The reason I don't necessarily agree with it being a new cynicism per se is that your hero is always fighting against the cynicism of the world, the defeatism of the world. Let's go back to Batman. Gotham's given up on itself. And Batman, much like Superman in 1978, says, I'm going to be the symbol. I'm going to show you the way to a better existence. And, it's very much a declaration that pays off in The Dark Knight and then pays off again in The Dark Knight Rises, that sort of thing.
Right.
Cobb is working in a cynical way, but toward hope in Inception. And there is a triumph in Interstellar, but everybody in the present has given up. Again, like Gotham.
Right.
I think what Nolan has done is he's taken this idea of giving up, put it to an antagonist that exists in the future, and said, if somebody was that and they had the technological know-how, what would they do? And I think that's interesting in and of itself, because it opens up this idea of the true heroism of the characters is the fact that they don't know for sure, but they have reason to believe things are going to go very poorly in the future, but they still fight for it. They don't give up hope. There's an underlying hope to everything. And I think that's just something that has, that's been the interplay throughout his works once he moves into, talking about the bigger themes instead of the intensely personal ones like in Memento or The Prestige.
Right. Well, and so the reason I posed the question, because I thought it was so interesting at the very end where they talk about this whole idea of, the protagonist and Neil are having the conversation of like, if it comes down to fate and faith, and in many ways, what you see is that there is a portion of humanity where absolute nihilism in the future is kind of taken over for them, and so they will try and destroy the past, even if it means that they're wrong and they can't just destroy the past and be okay themselves, because it would be better just to all be dead. And then there's the other section of humanity, Tenet, where they believe they have faith that they can persevere. That indomitable human spirit, kind of, Interstellar, what they talk about, especially McConaughey's character, that whole idea of like, we just used to, we used to look up the stars and now we're just here, the dirt. And the idea that we have lost that, and still having faith that humanity is worth saving. And so I just found that really interesting, though, in this movie, because I think it's a fight of like two like worldviews, and kind of also shows, and this has happened in many movies over the last like 15 years, but eco-terrorists are the worst.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely the flavor, and that's going to come up in Bond again. But yeah, no, like that. But there's a lesson, I guess, then in the underpinning everything of, if you hit the negative messaging so hard, eventually people are going to give up, and eventually people aren't going to be roused by excessive negative messaging to save everything necessarily. They're going to be roused to destroy it all, to say, screw it, let's just end it. And so these theoretical future people hit that point, and that's incredibly dangerous because they have the technology to therefore end everyone. And so that becomes that becomes a sort of the thing where the destructive impulse takes over. And so you have to be so careful about how you phrase and contextualize the problems, because if you oversell your point and you convince everybody that the boat is sinking and there's no way to save it, they're going to stop bailing water. You know, like imagine, you know, if you go on and you say, oh, you know, it show's over, everything's done, nothing you do is going to matter, and we're all screwed. Do you honestly think you're going to get people suddenly to rise up and say, hey, let's keep fighting? Or are you going to get them to say, oh, wow, well, all right, nothing I can do, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think you're speaking directly into what, you know, Lucas and the reason he created Star Wars, you know, was to fight against the cynicism of the age. You know, the spirit of the age that has actually continued from the 70s onward has been this ultra cynicism, I think. And it's continued to get worse and worse and worse. And there were some reprieves throughout those periods, but I think it's come back in a new way, and I think you're absolutely right, you know, kind of seeing this, that Nolan's kind of rightly pinpointed that with these two future groups, there's either you go towards ultimate nihilism or you have to find hope somewhere, you know, right, and in something. And that hope is what's going to give you the reason to move forward, and it's going to have to be strong enough, even in the face of ultimate Armageddon, right? Like, yep. Because obviously, people in Tenet are seeing the same things in their world that the people who are grabbing on to ultimate nihilism, and so I think you know, it's just fascinating because it's for Nolan. I feel like it's as close to it, and especially when you think about Interstellar 2, it's as close to religious as you're going to get from him. But there is this almost a somewhat religious nature, I think, to the idea that we've got to find hope somewhere, and it has to be strong enough. Otherwise, we will give in to the nihilism, and it will be our destruction. Yep.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, and something big about this movie is the soundtrack is by Ludwig Göransson, who did The Mandalorian, and this is his first Nolan film. How did you think he did with crafting a soundscape for this latest Nolan flick?
I think that he did a magnificent job, and I think that also it sounded like work that Zimmer has done for...
Yeah.
Again, it gets back to, I think, what I was saying earlier. Nolan very clearly communicated what he wanted, and Göransson delivered it. And I think he delivered it very well. And I think that the score is terrific. And I think that, he did everything he was asked. Do I think that it's as stirring and sort of like excellent as I would say is The Mandalorian or Creed? No, not necessarily. But I still think it was a great score.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it works really well for the movie. And I would say, for the most part, I feel like the score fits well within the film and does what it needs to do with the film. And I would say it's akin to me to what Lauren Baff did in Mission Impossible Fallout, which was not my favorite score for the series, but it really works with the film itself as you're watching the film. So, and there are going to be those scores, right, that where you're going to have them, and they legitimately are ones that play much better within the film than they would just listening to by themselves, because they're meant so specifically to go with what's going on the screen,
right?
And so I think this is one of those scores, and I no problem with that. That's what this movie needed, and I think Nolan got what he wanted with the sound. So and it works perfectly. So, I I guess, John, it really just comes down to then, because there's so much with this movie that we could talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm really I can't wait to talk about it with people there on social media here to see what they think. But I'm wondering what your rating for Tenet is.
It's 5. It's an instant 5 for me. It doesn't need to be my favorite Nolan film. It doesn't need to be even my favorite film of the year. It just strictly on the terms of what he pulls off from a technical achievement and a choreography of things. No matter what you think of the plot, and I've seen people complain about the plot and those sorts of things. No matter what you think of that stuff, you have to respect the absolute skill he brings to his craft and what he does with this film. It is stunning on so many levels. So yeah, solid 5.
You and I were talking behind the scenes, as we often do, and we've said this before about Nolan, is that he makes art.
Yep.
And art is something sometimes that takes time to truly appreciate, but I immediately appreciate this film for everything it's doing. From the storytelling, the challenge that it is to watch, the fact that it's not dumbing it down for the audience at all. It allows you to go on the ride and to enjoy the ride every moment. I think the characters are fascinating in the film. The storyline is fantastic. The execution visually is beyond stunning. I mean, that last 30 minutes, 40 minutes is akin to like the last 40 minutes of Rogue One, right? Where you just are back in your seat and it's pure cinema entertainment the whole time. Yep. This is what that's like, but that's the entire movie.
Yes.
You know, like it never stops. And then I will say the last 30 minutes of this movie are just absolutely stunning. The technical achievement that it is fascinating. But I never lost sight of the human aspect in this movie at all. I mean, a lot of people, again, we talked about how sometimes they complain about losing the human element in Nolan's films. But this movie came down to me really caring about and liking these characters. And so that made the tension of those final 30 minutes big deal. And it kind of it leaves you a little bit sad when you realize that what's going to happen to Neil. You know?
Yeah, so, I mean it's magnificent. It really is.
So, yeah, I'm right there with you. I absolutely loved it. 5 stars. Absolutely. And, you know, for the movies that have come out this year that I've seen in the theater, this is absolutely the best movie I've seen in the theater. So, like, you know, and I would say so far it's the best movie I've seen released this year. It's phenomenal. So, if you haven't gotten a chance to go see it and you've been listening to this, go see Tenet. And so, we'll get back to the recommendations next week. John, I think we were both just say we'd recommend go seeing Tenet. There is no other recommendation.
If you have the ability and they have the procedures set up and all of that stuff, it is well worth your time and money in the movie theater. You know, every place that's open is going to have their procedures and everything in place to make it as comfortable and safe as possible for you. So I do encourage people, you know, if you can to go out and catch this on the big screen. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, John, if anybody wants to catch up with you and see what you got going on, where can they find you?
You can find me as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice, Twitter, Vero, Instagram. Sure. You can find me on those networks. You can find me actually at kesseljunkie.com, tip-tapping away. Just had a passion for blogging again lately and got quite a streak going, so check that out. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network on one single season show called House of Fincher, where we go through the works of David Fincher leading up to the release of his Netflix film, Mank. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network on a regularly occurring show that comes out every week that has to do with Star Wars called Aggressive Negotiations that I co-host with a charming fellow named Matt Rushing.
Me. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, make sure you're following the 602 Club on Twitter as well as on Instagram. You can also find me here on the network doing two other shows. One is The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and we're also on Literary Treks together as we talk about the books and the comics of Star Trek. And next to Aggressive Negotiations over in the Nerd Party Network, I'm doing Owl Post with Drea Kaufman as we talk about Harry Potter, one chapter at a time, each and every week. So it's a lot of fun. So thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now, you hear?